Keck stood at the observation window of the Galactic Council's neutral station and watched the human fleet move into formation. The ships were small compared to the massive vessels that belonged to the older civilizations, but they moved with a kind of purpose that made Keck's analytical mind take notice. Around him, other observers from different alien species whispered among themselves. Some made betting wagers on how long the human fleet would last. Others simply shook their heads and returned to their work. Commissioner Vex from the Altair Alliance approached Keck and stood beside him without speaking for a long moment. Vex had 4 eyes that could see in different light spectrums at the same time. His skin was a deep blue color, and his body was covered with patterns that changed when he felt strong emotions. Right now, the patterns were shifting from calm blue to worried purple. "They will be destroyed in hours," Vex said to Keck. His voice was deep and carried the weight of someone who had seen many battles in his long life. Vex was more than 3,000 years old. He had watched civilizations rise and fall. He had seen wars that lasted centuries. The Void Collective is not something you fight with hope and courage. They are a force of nature. They consume everything they touch. Keck nodded slowly. He had read the same reports that Vex had read. The Void Collective had attacked the Kepler sector 6 months ago. They had destroyed 17 systems in that time. Their weapons could crack open planets. Their ships could destroy entire fleets without sustaining damage. They were invulnerable, or at least that was what all the data suggested. Kex was a chronicler. This meant his job was to watch events happen and record them for history. His people did not interfere. They did not take sides. They simply observed and documented. Keck had traveled to hundreds of worlds and watched hundreds of battles. He had recorded the destruction of the Tremaine Empire. He had documented the peaceful merger of the Northern Coalition. He had witnessed the signing of the First Contact Treaty between 7 different species. But something about this moment felt different. Captain Linda Martinez sat in the command center of the human ship called the USS Valiant. She was 63 years old. Her hair was gray, and lines covered her face from decades of smiling and frowning. Her hands were steady as she typed commands into the computer system. Around her, other humans worked at their stations. They were young and old, male and female. Some were nervous, and others seemed calm. Linda had been a soldier her entire life. She had joined the human military when she was only 18 years old. She had fought in small wars on human colonies. She had led soldiers through terrible situations. She had learned that the most important thing a leader could do was stay calm when everything else was falling apart. Right now, she was very calm. "All ships, check your weapon systems," she said into the communication device. Her voice came out steady and clear. Around the Kepler sector, 42 human ships received her message and began their final checks. 42 ships against an enemy that had destroyed much larger fleets. The numbers did not look good. A younger officer approached Linda's chair. His name was Mark, and he was only 26 years old. He had been born on a human colony world and had never even visited Earth, but his parents had taught him to value duty and honor and the protection of the innocent. "Captain, scouts report that the Void Collective fleet is moving into attack position," Mark said. His voice shook a little. He was afraid. Any person with a working brain would be afraid. Linda stood up from her chair and placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. "Fear is normal," she said to him. "But we do not let fear control our choices. We knew what we were walking into when we came here. These people in this sector need protection. The Void Collective will eat them alive if we do not stand in the way. Our choice is simple. Either we fight or we let them die. There is no third option." Mark nodded. He understood. Everyone on this ship understood. They were not the strongest military force in the galaxy. They did not have the most advanced technology. But they had something that mattered more. They had chosen to be here. They had chosen to protect people they did not even know. That choice meant everything. The Void Collective ships emerged from behind a nearby moon. They were massive, ancient, and terrible to look at. The largest ship was almost 4 kilometers long. The smallest ships were still larger than the biggest human vessel. Their hulls were dark and covered with weapon systems. As Kex watched, the weapons began to charge. The sound of that charging could be felt through the entire observation station. "They are going to attack now," Vex said to Kex. "There is nothing the humans can do. This will be over in minutes." But Linda gave her final order to her fleet. "All ships, form pattern Delta. Weapons ready. Shields to maximum. And tell every person on every ship this message. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. We fight for our families waiting at home. We fight because we choose to. Hold the line." The human ships moved forward as one. They were small and fast. They were not beautiful ships, but they were made with purpose. Humans had a saying that Kex had learned. Ugly is often what works. These ships looked like they could work. The first blast came from the Void Collective weapons. It was massive and blue and bright. It destroyed 3 human ships instantly. The explosions lit up the darkness of space like terrible stars. Kex watched the readings on the sensors and saw the names of the destroyed ships disappear from the tracking systems. Each one had carried hundreds of human soldiers and crew members. Linda did not hesitate. She did not stop. She did not retreat. "All ships, fire all weapons," she commanded. And the human fleet attacked. The weapons fire from the human ships was much smaller than the weapons fire from the Void Collective. But the humans had learned something important over their short history as a spacefaring species. They had learned to be smart about war. They had learned to think about what they were doing instead of just hitting harder. The human ships attacked not the Void Collective ships directly, but the space around them. They fired in patterns that forced the massive alien vessels to move. They attacked communication systems. They targeted power stations. They flew in close and fast and made themselves very difficult targets. Vex's patterns shifted from purple to red. He was shocked. This was not supposed to happen. The Void Collective was supposed to be unstoppable. But here, in the space above Kepler 5, something unexpected was occurring. "This is impossible," Vex said to Kex. "They cannot win this battle." Kex looked at the chronicler's recording device in his hand. It was capturing every moment of this fight. Every decision. Every sacrifice. Every moment of human courage. "Perhaps not," Kex said. "But they are fighting like they believe they can. And that belief is changing how this battle unfolds." As the hours passed and the battle raged on, Kex began to understand something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was not just watching a military battle. He was watching the moment that a young species learned who they really were. The humans were fighting like their lives depended on it, because, for them, the lives of others did depend on it. And that was something the Void Collective could not understand. The battle would be remembered. The humans would make sure of that. The battle had been raging for 16 hours when David Pierce made his decision. David was a lieutenant colonel in the human military, which meant he was responsible for the lives of 430 soldiers under his command. He was 45 years old and had spent most of his life fighting in small conflicts across human space. He had never expected to find himself in a war against an enemy as powerful as the Void Collective. David stood in the briefing room of the USS Valiant with Captain Linda Martinez and listened to the tactical report. The situation was bad. Very bad. They had lost 7 ships. 342 soldiers and crew members were dead. The Void Collective had already destroyed 2 human mining colonies. Thousands of civilians were now at risk, but the worst part was the Void Collective's main weapon. It was a massive energy cannon mounted on their flagship. Every time that weapon fired, human ships died. It had already destroyed 2 of the human cruisers. If they did not disable that weapon, the human fleet would not survive another 6 hours. "We need a strike team," David said to Linda. His voice was calm, but inside, he already knew what had to be done. He was going to have to ask people to do the impossible. He was going to have to ask people to walk into a place they might not walk out of. Linda looked at David for a long moment. They had served together for many years. They understood each other without needing to speak many words. Linda knew that David was volunteering to lead the team that would board the enemy flagship and destroy the weapon. She also knew that the chances of success were very low. "How many do you need?" Linda asked. 45, David said. "We will need soldiers who are quick and smart and brave. We will need people who can fight in the dark and the tight spaces of an enemy ship. We will need people who understand that this mission might kill them." Linda nodded. "I will send out a call for volunteers. We will have more than 45 who want to go with you." She was right. When David announced that he needed volunteers for a dangerous mission with low chances of survival, 230 soldiers stepped forward. David had to choose only 45. It was one of the hardest things he had ever done. Looking into the eyes of young soldiers and telling them they could not go, that they did not get to make the choice to risk their lives. David selected his team carefully. He needed a mix of skills and experience. He needed people who were strong and people who were clever. He needed young people with fast reflexes and older people with experience. He chose Sarah, who had been a doctor before the war and could treat injuries. He chose Johnny, who was the best shot David had ever seen. He chose Maria, who could crack open locked doors using tools and her intelligence. When the 45 soldiers were ready, David gathered them in a transport bay. They were wearing combat gear and carrying weapons. Each one of them had said goodbye to someone. Some had recorded messages for their families. Some had simply written letters. They all knew they might not make it back. "The weapon we are going to destroy has killed 300 of our people," David told them. His voice was steady and strong. He did not make this sound like a mission they might survive. He made it sound like a mission that was important. "The families of those people are waiting back home for news. The colonies we are trying to protect have children in them. Children who will never get to see the stars if we do not do this thing. That is why we are going. That is why we will succeed. Not because it is easy, but because it is right." The 45 soldiers moved into the transport ship. David was the last one to enter. As he did, he looked back at the command center where Linda was watching him. She did not wave or smile. She simply watched him with eyes that understood what he was about to do. The transport ship launched from the Valiant and moved toward the Void Collective flagship. It was the most heavily defended ship in the enemy fleet. The human fighters protecting the transport had to fight their way through waves of enemy drones. 2 fighters were destroyed before they could escape. But the transport ship made it through. David and his team hit the flagship's landing bay hard. The moment they touched down, enemy soldiers began attacking them. The darkness of the enemy ship was filled with the sound of weapons fire. 2 of David's soldiers died in the first seconds. But they kept moving forward. They kept pushing deeper into the ship. The Void Collective had not expected humans to be bold enough to board a major warship. They had not prepared their internal defenses for this kind of attack. This gave David and his team a small advantage. They moved through the corridors of the flagship like hunters. When they encountered enemy soldiers, they fought. They were outnumbered, but they were fighting to protect their homes. That gave them an advantage that no alien weapon could overcome. Sarah saved David's life by pulling him out of the way of a blast that would have killed him. Johnny killed 17 Void Collective soldiers by himself. Maria led the team around 3 different enemy ambushes using her ability to read the ship's layout from the tactical systems. They reached the weapons chamber after 8 hours of fighting. They had lost 23 soldiers, but they reached it. David planted the explosives that would destroy the weapon system. Maria worked the computer controls to lock down the doors so the enemy soldiers could not enter. Johnny and the remaining soldiers stood guard, knowing that they had perhaps 10 minutes before the explosives would detonate. "We are done," David said into his communication device. His voice reached Linda in the command center of the Valiant. "The weapon will be destroyed in 10 minutes. You need to get the transport ship out of here before it happens." "What about you?" Linda asked. "We will try to escape," David said. But they both knew the truth. The distance was too far. The explosives would detonate before they could reach the transport ship. They had always known this was a one-way mission. "We are proud to serve with you, Captain. Tell our families that we did what we could." The explosives detonated at the precise time David had calculated. The explosion was massive. It tore through the weapons chamber and destroyed the main cannon and the power systems connected to it. The Void Collective flagship was crippled. David and his team never made it back to the transport. They died doing what they had chosen to do. They died protecting people they did not even know. But their sacrifice meant something. Back in human space, when the news of their deaths was announced, something changed in how humans thought about themselves. They realized that they had heroes among them. They realized that their young people were willing to do impossible things to protect the innocent. That realization would change everything. The rescue teams found Emma in the detention block of the Void Collective ship. She was 8 years old. She had been missing for 7 months. When the soldiers found her, she was sitting in a dark cell with 23 other children. All of them had been taken from human colonies. All of them were terrified. Emma's mother, Catherine, was working in the agricultural dome of Colony Station 7 when the Void Collective attacked. She had hidden in the emergency shelter while the alien soldiers took the children. She had watched her daughter being dragged away and had been unable to do anything to stop it. The memory had haunted her every single day for the past 7 months. When the news came that human forces had attacked the Void Collective flagship and destroyed the main weapon, Catherine felt a small spark of hope. But hope was a dangerous thing. It made people dream about outcomes that might never happen. It made people believe that their loved ones might come home. The rescue teams brought Emma and the other children back to the human ships. Medical personnel checked them for injuries and illness. Emma did not speak at first. She simply stared at the humans around her like they were not real, like she had dreamed them up in her imagination. A soldier named Kevin was assigned to stay with Emma while she recovered. Kevin was 28 years old and had joined the military to protect his younger sister. He was strong and kind, and he had a way of making people feel safe even when the world was falling apart. He sat beside Emma's medical bed and did not force her to talk. He simply sat with her in the silence. After many hours, Emma finally spoke. Her voice was very small and very quiet. "Are you going to hurt me?" she asked. Kevin felt something break inside his chest. This child had been through so much that she expected pain and cruelty. She did not understand that she was safe, that she was being rescued, that people had died to save her. "No," Kevin said. "Nobody is going to hurt you. You are safe now. We are taking you home." Emma began to cry. She cried so hard that her entire body shook. Kevin held her while she cried. He did not try to stop her tears or tell her to be brave. He simply let her feel everything she needed to feel. Because Emma had earned the right to cry. She had survived something terrible. She had kept going even when she had no reason to believe that things would ever get better. The human fleet regrouped after the destruction of the main weapon. They had lost many ships and many soldiers, but they were still fighting, and the Void Collective ships were pulling back. They were retreating. For the first time in this war, the aliens were running away from the humans. Kex the Chronicler watched all of this from the observation station. He was recording everything. He was documenting the moment when a young species discovered its own strength. But he was also doing something that his people were not supposed to do. He was beginning to understand what it meant to care about the outcome. Commissioner Vex found Kex in the observation chamber. The Altair Counselor's patterns were shifting rapidly between different colors, showing confusion and wonder and something that might have been respect. "I do not understand," Vex said to Kex. "The humans have inferior technology. They have smaller ships. They have less advanced weapons. By every measure, they should have lost this war. Yet here we stand, watching them win." Kex turned to look at the older alien. "The Void Collective fought to conquer," Kex said. "They fought to take resources and power and control. But the humans fought to protect. They fought to save children like Emma. They fought so that families could stay together. That is a reason to fight that is stronger than conquest." The Void Collective never understood what they were fighting against. Back on Earth, the news of the victory was spreading. The families of the fallen soldiers were grieving, but they were also proud. A woman named Margaret had lost her son in the battle. His name had been David, and he had been 24 years old. He had only been in the military for 3 years, but he had died doing what he believed in. He had died protecting people. He had died being a hero. Margaret recorded a message that was sent across all human communication networks. Her face appeared on screens in homes and workplaces and public squares. She was crying, but she was speaking clearly and strongly. "My son David believed that all people deserve to be safe," Margaret said. "He believed that no matter how far away someone lives, we have a responsibility to protect them. He gave his life so that children in a distant colony would not have to suffer. I am sad that he is gone. I miss him every moment. But I am also proud. I am proud of his choice. I am proud of his courage. And I want every person who is listening to know that his death meant something. His sacrifice will not be forgotten." The message made humans across the galaxy stop and think. For thousands of years, humans had been considered young and weak and not very important in the larger galaxy. But in a single battle, they had proven something different. They had proven that they were willing to sacrifice everything for people they loved. Young people began signing up for the military. Engineers began designing new ships. Scientists began developing new weapons. But the most important thing that began to change was how humans thought about themselves. They stopped thinking like victims. They stopped thinking like a species that needed to be protected by older and more powerful civilizations. They started thinking like people who could stand on their own and protect others. Emma was reunited with her mother, Catherine, on one of the transport ships heading back to human space. When Catherine first saw her daughter, she did not speak. She simply held Emma and cried. Emma cried too, but they were tears of relief and joy. Later, Emma told her mother about the nice soldier named Kevin who had sat with her and made her feel safe. Catherine made a point of finding Kevin and thanking him. She told him that he had saved her daughter's life in more ways than just the physical rescue. He had shown Emma that there were good people in the universe. He had given her back her hope. Kevin was uncomfortable with the thanks. He had simply done what he believed was right. He had simply treated a child the way he would want someone to treat his own sister. But Catherine insisted that what he had done mattered. It mattered very much. The Void Collective continued their retreat. They did not attack any more human worlds. Instead, They began moving away from human space, seeking easier targets among the civilizations that had never learned to fight back. The humans had taught them a lesson. That lesson was that humans were not easy to defeat. That humans would stand and fight when things mattered. That humans would sacrifice everything to protect their own. This knowledge would change the galaxy forever. The memorial wall was being built in the central plaza of the human colony on the Station Prime. The names were being carved into a material that would last for thousands of years. 8,219 names. Each one representing a human being who had died in the battle against the Void Collective. 8,219 families who would never be the same. The carving ceremony was attended by humans from across the galaxy. They came to mourn. They came to remember. They came to understand what their sacrifice had meant. A woman named Julia was there to watch her father's name being carved into the wall. Her father was named Ronald, and he had been a captain of one of the human destroyers. He had stayed in his ship while it was attacked by the Void Collective to make sure his crew could escape in the lifeboats. He had gone down with his ship. He had been 72 years old. Julia was 45 years old now, and she still missed her father very much. She had brought her children to see their grandfather's name on the memorial wall. She wanted them to understand what sacrifice meant. She wanted them to know that their family had given something precious to protect people they did not even know. Why did grandfather do that? Her youngest child asked, pointing at the name. Julia took her child's hand. Because, she said, there were people who needed help. Grandfather was strong and brave, and he knew he could help them. So he did. He helped so many people. That is what I want you to remember about him. I want you to remember that he was the kind of person who helped others even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous. Her child nodded, but Julia could see that the full understanding would come later. When they were older, they would understand what it meant to sacrifice everything. For now, it was enough that they knew their grandfather had been a good person. The Galactic Council called an emergency session to discuss the implications of humanity's victory. Counselors from 53 different species gathered in the Great Hall. Some were humanoid. Some looked like floating clouds of energy. Some were creatures made of crystal and stone. All of them were curious about what had happened in the Kepler sector. Vex from the Altair Alliance spoke first. He talked about the human strategy and the human weapons and the human courage. He spoke like someone who had been amazed by what he had witnessed. The humans are a young species, Vex told the council. But they have already learned something that many of us took thousands of years to understand. They have learned that there is more strength in protecting the innocent than in conquering the powerful. They have learned that sacrifice is the highest honor a being can know. Other counselors began to speak. Some warned against trusting the humans too much. Some suggested that humans were too unpredictable and too willing to take risks. But the majority of the council seemed to agree with Vex. The humans had proven themselves. They had earned the respect of the galaxy. The council voted to grant full membership to humanity. This meant that human worlds would be protected by the council. It meant that human soldiers would have the right to fight alongside warriors from other species. It meant that humans were no longer a young and vulnerable species. They were now one of the civilizations that the galaxy had to take seriously. Back on Earth, humans were watching the broadcast of the council session. When they heard that they had been granted membership, celebrations erupted in streets and squares across the planet. People were crying and cheering and holding each other. They had been recognized. Their sacrifice had meant something, but not everyone was celebrating with joy. Many people were still grieving. 8,219 people dead. That was too high a price, no matter how great the victory. The military created a program to support the families of the fallen soldiers. The government made sure that families would be taken care of. Scholarship programs were created so the children of fallen soldiers could attend university. Jobs were promised to widows and widowers. The government said, "We will honor those who gave everything by making sure their families do not suffer." That promise became one of the most important values in human society. It said something fundamental about who humans were. It said that humans took care of their own. It said that sacrifice would be rewarded with honor. It said that the families of the fallen would not be abandoned. A documentary was made about the battle. It told the stories of the soldiers who had died. It told about David Pierce and his strike team. It told about Ronald, who had stayed with his ship. It told about thousands of other humans whose names would be remembered forever. The documentary was shown across the galaxy. Beings from 100 different species watched it and learned what it meant to be human. They learned that humans loved their families fiercely. They learned that humans would die to protect strangers. They learned that humans would honor their sacrifices by remembering them and teaching their children about them. Something was changing in how the galaxy viewed humans. Fear was being replaced by respect. Doubt was being replaced by understanding. Young people from human colonies began volunteering for the expanded military forces. Engineers and scientists worked on building new ships and better weapons. But more importantly, humans began to organize themselves around the idea that they had a responsibility to protect others. They began to see themselves as protectors rather than victims. The Void Collective, watching from their distant territories, began to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. They had attacked a species that had something far more dangerous than advanced weapons. They had attacked a species that understood the power of sacrifice and honor and love. The reports coming back from the Kepler sector were changing how other alien civilizations thought about war. If humans could defeat the Void Collective, then humans were a force to be reckoned with. If humans could inspire their people with stories of sacrifice and honor, then humans had a strength that technology alone could not match. Kex the Chronicler finished his recordings of the battle and the aftermath. He had documented everything. He had recorded the words of the fallen soldiers. He had recorded the grief of their families. He had recorded the moment when a young species discovered its own strength and started to change the galaxy simply by being true to who they were. Years later, beings would study Kex's recordings to understand what happened in the Kepler sector. They would learn lessons about courage and sacrifice and the power of caring about people other than yourself. They would learn why the humans had won when they should have lost. But the most important lesson was simple. Humans won because they had people worth protecting. They had families waiting at home. They had children who needed a safe world to grow up in. They had people they loved more than their own lives. And when you have something worth dying for, you become capable of doing anything. Captain Linda Martinez stood in the command center of the new human flagship, the USS Horizon. It was larger than the Valiant had been. It had better weapons and better shields and better technology. But Linda barely noticed these things. She was focused on something else. She was focused on the memorial wall that had been installed near the observation deck. The names of 8,219 dead humans were carved into that wall. Each name was a person Linda had known or would have wanted to know. Each name represented a choice someone had made to fight for something bigger than themselves. Linda was older now. It had been 5 years since the battle in the Kepler sector. Her gray hair had become whiter. The lines on her face had deepened. She had spent every one of those 5 years thinking about what had happened, thinking about what those sacrifices had meant. She placed her hand on the wall and found the name of David Pierce. David had been one of the best soldiers she had ever known. He had died leading a strike team against the Void Collective flagship. She thought about him often. She wondered what he would have become if he had lived, what kind of leader he would have been, what kind of family he might have had. But David would never know those things. His life had been cut short so that other people could live. Kex the Chronicler was visiting human space. He had been asked to speak to gatherings of humans about what he had seen during the battle. He had been asked to share his recordings and his observations. The humans wanted to understand themselves better. They wanted to know why they had won when logic and mathematics and weapons, calculations said they should have lost. Kex spoke to crowds of hundreds of humans. He spoke to scientists and military leaders and children in schools. He told them what he had witnessed in the Kepler sector. He told them about the courage. He told them about the sacrifice. He told them about the moment when humanity discovered who they really were. "You are not the strongest species in the galaxy," Kex told them. "You are not the most technologically advanced. You do not have the longest lifespan or the most powerful weapons. But you have something that is more valuable than any of those things. You have the ability to love so deeply that you are willing to die for strangers. You have the ability to organize yourselves around protecting the innocent. That makes you more dangerous than any weapon. That makes you the species that the galaxy has learned to fear." After one of his speeches, a young human approached Kex. She was maybe 20 years old. She introduced herself as Lisa. Her older brother had died in the battle. She wanted to ask Kex a question. "Did my brother know that his death would change everything?" she asked. Kex looked at the young human for a long moment. He thought about David Pierce and about Ronald, who had gone down with his ship. He thought about all the humans who had given their lives and all the humans who had come home wounded or traumatized or never the same. "I do not know if your brother understood the full impact of his choice," Kex said. "But I know that he understood that his choice mattered. He understood that by standing and fighting, he was protecting people he would never meet. He understood that his sacrifice could inspire others to be brave. And that understanding is enough." Lisa nodded. She seemed satisfied with the answer. She told Kex that she had been accepted to a university to study engineering. She was going to design ships. She was going to make sure that future humans would have better tools to protect themselves and protect others. Kex watched her walk away and understood something profound. The battle in the Kepler sector was not just about military victory. It was about inspiring a species to believe in itself. It was about showing humans that they were capable of doing impossible things. On Earth, there was a new memorial being built. It was called the Hall of Sacrifice. It was a place where humans could come to remember the fallen and to think about what their deaths meant. The hall was being designed by an architect named Patricia. Patricia had lost her husband in the battle. He had been an engineer on one of the cruisers. She wanted to create a space that honored his memory and the memories of all the others. The hall would have rooms for each of the major battles that had taken place. It would have displays showing what the fallen soldiers had been like as people. It would have a quiet room where people could go to cry. It would have a bright room where people could celebrate the lives of the dead dog. Patricia wanted the hall to teach visitors something important. She wanted them to understand that the people who died were not just soldiers. They were mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. They were people who had dreams and hopes and loved ones waiting at home. Their deaths mattered because they were humans. Because they had been real people with real lives. As Patricia worked on the design, she thought about her husband, George. George had been a kind man. He had loved to cook and to teach their children about the stars. He had not wanted to fight in the war, but he understood that the war was necessary. He understood that terrible things sometimes need to be done to protect the innocent. The last message George had sent to Patricia before the battle was simple. He said, "I love you. I love our children. I am proud to do this thing. Tell the children that I am thinking of them." Patricia cried when she read that message. She cried often, even 5 years later. But she also channeled her grief into her work. She wanted to create a place where the memory of George and all the others would be preserved forever. Vex from the Altair Alliance was in conversation with Linda Martinez on the bridge of the USS Horizon. The two had become friends in the years since the battle. They had spent time discussing philosophy and history and what it meant to be a being in the galaxy. "Your species has changed everything," Vex said to Linda. "Before your victory against the Void Collective, strength was measured in weapons and technology. But now, the galaxy understands that strength is also measured in courage and sacrifice and the willingness to protect others. This is a new way of thinking. And it is because of humanity." Linda looked at the stars through the observation window. The stars had not changed. They were still burning the same way they had burned for billions of years. But the beings who looked up at those stars had changed. Humans had learned what they were capable of. And that knowledge had changed the galaxy. "We are still learning," Linda said. "We made mistakes during that battle. We lost people we should not have lost. But we also learned who we are. We learned that we can stand together. We learned that sacrifice means something. We learned that protection of the innocent is the highest purpose we can serve." Years would pass. Humans would continue to build and to protect and to inspire other species to be brave. The story of the Kepler sector would be told and retold until it became legend. Young humans would grow up hearing about Captain Linda Martinez and David Pierce and all the others who had given their lives. And every time the story was told, something would change in who was listening. They would understand that humans were not weak. They would understand that humans would stand and fight for what mattered. They would understand why the stars trembled when humans walked among them. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity. But not because humans were cruel or violent or conquering. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity because humans were willing to die to protect others. Because humans understood that some things were worth any price. Because humans had discovered that sacrifice was not weakness. Sacrifice was the source of true power.